I finally met my online friend horror story? Story 1. I met a guy online. We really hit it off, and he came over a few times so we could hang out. I found him attractive and tried to hint that I was into him. Note, I can't flirt to save my life, but nothing ever happened. After a few dates, he suddenly vanished offline. No social media, no replies to texts or emails, nothing. I thought he had ghosted me. 6 months later, he reappeared, and when I asked where he had been, he just said, "I don't want to talk about it." A few weeks later, there was a trend where people were Googling their own names and posting funny stories they found about others with the same name. Mine was about a ship that had my initials. Out of boredom and morbid curiosity, I started Googling friends' names. When I Googled his, I found a local news story from his area. One of those crime and courts articles saying he had been charged with statutory rape of a minor and online grooming, and that his computer and phone had been seized as evidence. Story 2. A guy I knew in college met a girl online and spent every day talking about her. She lived about 6 hours away, so he planned to take a semester off to pursue the relationship. He found a job posting in her town and asked if I'd help him move out there since my car could carry more than he could take on a bus. I had a long weekend off and figured, why not? A road trip could be fun. I'd drive him out as a goodbye gift, and on the way back I planned to visit Yellowstone. Well, we arrive, and it turns out he doesn't have an apartment lined up, and he hadn't actually gotten that job, or even applied yet. I made a bunch of phone calls and managed to find him a room to rent that would let him move in that day with just first month's rent, last month's, and a deposit, even without a job. I was tired and disgusted with his lack of planning, but I figured it was worth staying the night and ending things on good terms with my buddy. Then he broke down and confessed that he hadn't actually met this girl. The nights he claimed to be video chatting with her were really just him watching her vlogs and pleasuring himself. They had never talked, never texted, never even emailed. He hadn't left so much as a comment or a like on one of her videos. She genuinely didn't, and still doesn't, know he exists. His plan was to hang out at a game shop she often mentioned until she showed up, and then somehow create a relationship from there. He thought they'd meet, she'd fall in love with him, and she'd move back to our college town to marry him, all before the next semester began. That didn't happen. Instead, I made him buy a bus ticket to get back to school and left. He came back and got even more cringy, not less. I lost track of him after that. Story 3. This was way back in the mid-90s, when bulletin board systems were all the rage. I made friends with this guy from North Carolina. He was friends with a bunch of us from my dorm, mostly females, which probably should have been a red flag, but I was extremely naive at the time. A couple of months in, he mentioned he was coming to our state for a wedding and asked if he could stop by our college to meet everyone. It was agreed he'd sleep in my dorm room since my roommate was almost never around. There was no discussion or thought of sex, but I was excited to meet him and see if he was as funny and charming in person as he was online. Well, the day arrives, and the dude shows up. I should mention that my college friends and I were 18 or 19, while this guy was 24, or so he said. He looked, and I'm not exaggerating, like a cancer patient. Pale, gaunt features, long greasy blonde hair except for the bald patch on top, and overall like he was either about to die or dressed as a ghoul for Halloween. He insisted on hugging all of us. I tried reminding myself that looks don't matter and that he was a cool guy despite his unsettling appearance. But once we started hanging out, things got worse. He asked really invasive questions, made strange comments about everything being said, and was just overall creepy and distressing. I was sitting on the floor with another friend, literally rocking back and forth from how uncomfortable I felt. That night, he kept insisting we could share my tiny twin dorm bed. I lied and said I had hurt my back and that sleeping on the floor helped, just to avoid it. Nope, 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 nope. That was the last time I ever met anyone from that site. Story 4. I don't know if it's exactly a horror story, but it's how I ended up where I live now. I played WoW for years with a pretty regular group, got to know them offline, and at one point 2 of them, a couple, invited me to move across the country. At the time, I didn't have anything tying me down, so I packed up and moved. I got out here, moved in with my friends, and everything seemed fine. My buddy was a long-haul driver, so he was gone for days at a time. His girlfriend kept trying to set me up, multiple times, with 2 of her friends, one of them in Minnesota. I had a hard time finding work for a while, but eventually I got a job, started putting some money away, and helped watch their kids. Then, out of nowhere, my buddy accused me of trying to fool around with his girlfriend. Nothing had ever happened, but I had noticed her spending more and more time in my room when he wasn't home. I knew his history. His previous relationship had ended after she cheated with one of his friends. He wouldn't listen, so I got kicked out without warning. They stole about $1,000 worth of my stuff and later moved. Ultimately, it all worked out for me. I cut him and his girlfriend out of my life completely, moved on, and now I've got a good job, a wife, and kids. Story 5. After college ended, I was playing a game called EVE Online. I was in a corporation with a guy who I thought was the coolest. He sold items in the game for real-world money, had built a supercomputer, and posted pictures of himself and his smoking hot girlfriend rock climbing and doing all this crazy shit. He was also a head chef where he worked, and since I'm a chef too, I had a bit of a bro crush on him. He told me after I graduated that he could hook me up with a manager job, and all I had to do was move up there. I sold everything I owned that day at a pawn shop, bought a U-Haul, and started driving. 1 hour before I got there, it was like a week-long drive. He called and said the job was no longer available and that I shouldn't come. When he found out how close I was, he told me to come anyway. When I arrived, I was completely blown away. They lived in a disgusting Section 8 one-bedroom apartment with 4 other people, had like 3 cats. I'm allergic, and a kid. Day 1, it was all drugs and partying. I did not partake and wasn't enthused. Day 2, I went into the city looking for a crappy job to survive. I got one, and it was terrible. Day 3, my buddy tells me we're all moving out and into a nicer apartment. In week 3, we actually move into a new place. And the first night there, he starts beating his girlfriend in front of their kid. The second time he hit her, I called the cops. He and his girlfriend immediately painted me as the bad guy, claiming they were just loving each other. And the cops escorted me out of the apartment. So there I was, 1,700 miles from home, homeless at 2 a.m., and it was pouring rain on all my stuff. Lars, you are a sack of shit, and I hope you die of space herpes. Story 6. I used to play WoW with my now ex. Our guild leader actually moved to our state with his wife. My ex and I broke up before we got the chance to meet them, and right after the breakup, the guild leader messaged my ex asking if it was cool if he and his wife got me drunk and took advantage of me. My ex showed me screenshots when I was picking up my stuff from his place, so I canceled my plans to meet them. My ex had been physically abusive and had left me to date the woman he cheated on me with. I tried to leave before, but he faked suicide attempts and I was terrified he'd go through with it, so I stayed. Even though he was in a new relationship, he tried to keep tabs on me and control me, but I saw the breakup as my chance to escape. I moved right after we split, and he didn't know my new address, so I blocked him everywhere. Somehow he kept getting information on me, though. Turns out the guild leader was feeding him everything because I hadn't deleted the guy on Facebook, thinking he was only a problem in person. When I confronted the guild leader over Messenger and brought up the abuse, he responded. He said he choked you because you were arguing and he was afraid he wouldn't get the chance to speak. He still loves you. For context, the choking happened when I was defending myself against false accusations of cheating. Story 7. I've been active in numerous online communities over the years and have been fortunate enough to meet many friends I made there in person. There's only been one incident I couldn't cope with. He picked me up at the airport, which was very nice of him, and as soon as we got in the car, he started picking his nose. There's a lot that goes through your mind when you hop into a vehicle with someone you've never been alone with, and you immediately catch them 2 knuckles deep in a nostril. I looked away quickly so he wouldn't notice and be embarrassed if he was just trying to sneak one out before I saw. If he did notice, he didn't seem embarrassed, so I relaxed a little and told myself maybe he was just extremely comfortable around me. Fine, sure. When I finally looked back, he was wiping his fingers across the dashboard. To this day, I'm not really sure what to think, but he spent the entire few hours we were together scooping out boogers and wiping them on parts of the car or the table at wherever we stopped. I realized I was being transported in a rolling booger shrine and that there was nothing I could touch without needing to wash my hands. I must have been sitting on a crust of fossilized booger residue. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. He was a nice guy, but I ended the visit early because I couldn't handle it. I don't consider myself a clean freak, but as the wiping piled up, it was all I could do not to throw open the passenger door and hurl myself out into traffic to escape. I still wonder if I should have said something to spare him future embarrassment, but it didn't feel like my place. What do you even say? Story 8. He and I were part of the same forum many years ago. He was dealing with his issues, and I was dealing with mine. I think we both went there to escape, where people wouldn't judge, and also because we were bored. I'm not quite sure when we really started talking, but I think it was when he told a terrible joke about kipper ties. We used to share everything over MSN. I'd give him advice about his love life, and he'd listen to all my fuck-ups. It took quite a few fuck-ups before we eventually met up. I think I already knew we were in love, but seeing him in person really cemented it, and we decided to give it a go even though we lived 300 miles apart. We had a lot of ups and downs. I was distant. He lived with his ex-girlfriend for a bit, even though she didn't have a job and couldn't afford her half of the rent. The same ex I'd given him advice about, whom he'd nicknamed Trouble, and who liked to claim she was pregnant every so often. We got over that, along with many other things, and finally moved in together. I thought our issues would be solved when there was no distance between us, but it turned out we were just very different people who wanted very different things, and the distance wasn't going to change that. We broke up after 3.5 years together. None of that's the horror story. Not the way he treated me. Not the fact he probably cheated on me. Not that I wasn't a priority and used to cry myself to sleep. About 1.5 years after breaking up, he got back in touch, and we talked like it was in the beginning, when we were friends. After a few weeks, he asked if I wanted to get back together. I said no and told him he'd broken my heart again. The next day, I got a phone call from his work because I was still his emergency contact, asking if I knew where he was because he hadn't turned up. The police got in touch too, and the last call that day was from his mom to let me know that he'd killed himself. Story 9. A couple of years ago, this girl messaged me on Reddit saying she really connected with a comment I made about seeing the ocean for the first time, because she'd just had a similar experience. She was planning to come down to Chicago to visit a friend and asked me for suggestions of things to do. I gave her a bunch, and we kept talking, finding more and more in common. Eventually, we started talking on the phone and texting, and when she came down, we went out for burgers and beer. We kept talking every day after that, and I was really starting to like her. She said she wanted to come back to Chicago and asked if she could stay with me. I told her of course, and a few weeks later she came for the weekend. Really, it was just Sunday, since she got in late Saturday and fell asleep on my couch. The next day, we went to the zoo and had an amazing time. After that, we came back to my place and decided to go to a nearby brewery that made a beer with her name in it. From there, we went bar hopping until we ended up at a dive bar near my apartment. We drank, played pool, then grabbed some to-go beers and walked to a spot by the river I like to hang out at. We sat, talked, started making out, and eventually headed back to my apartment. We hooked up that night, and the next morning we went to her favorite breakfast place on the south side, near her friend's apartment, before she had to drive back. We kept talking after that, and I was planning to visit her in Detroit, but then one day, she just ghosted me out of nowhere. Not as horrible as some other stories, but it sucked for me because I really liked her. And to this day, I have no idea why she stopped talking to me. Story 10. It's not really a horror story, but it's the reason I was put off meeting people from the internet. I was friends with a group I met through an online game, and after about 2 years I decided to meet 2 of them. They were a long-distance couple, one from my country and one from another, and they had already met many times and even spent 2 weeks together before meeting me. We met in the city, said hi and hugged, did some touristy stuff, took photos, the usual. But the whole time, they barely spoke to me. At first, I thought it was just nerves, since I was anxious too, but even after lunch they only talked to each other. I felt completely left out. I even took a sneaky video of them talking and sent it to a friend, who agreed it was weird. When it was time for me to leave, I told them I had to go and said I'd had a nice time. They just kept chatting with each other. I repeated myself, still nothing, so I started walking away. Only then did one of them finally say, "Oh, bye." I was really hurt. It felt like they didn't even want me there. I had spent a lot of money traveling down, especially hard since I didn't have a job at the time. When I got back, I stopped talking to them. The friend I sent the video to actually messaged them asking why they ignored me, and they tried to flip it on me, saying I was the quiet one, that I was rude, and even claiming I left without saying goodbye. I blocked them all in the game. A few months later, one of them found my social media and tried to reconnect. It started out okay, but then it went right back to them blaming me. That was it for me. I haven't met anyone from the internet since. Story 11. I was on Meet Me when I met this guy who seemed super cool. We ended up texting every single day, and eventually I took the train out to Los Angeles to meet him. When I got there, he was acting kind of shitty and said he hadn't gotten much sleep because he'd been partying until 5 a.m. We walked to his place, and when I stepped into his room, I was shocked. It was maybe 8 by 6.5 feet, with just a mat on the floor and a small jewelry box full of mementos on top of his suitcase of clothes. We took a nap together, then later went out for ramen, where he asked me to pay. I didn't mind too much. We went back to his place, listened to music, and waited to go to a party. That night we met up with some of his friends, and they were awful to him, constantly roasting and picking on him until he was visibly upset. I pulled him aside and told him to ignore it, that it was all just jokes. We ended up at the party where tons of people knew him. I sat outside on the patio with a few cool people I'd just met while waiting for him to come back after saying hi to everyone inside. He never did. I sat out there with strangers for about 3 hours, and people kept asking me if I was okay, either because I looked sad or just like a total loner. I eventually went to find him, but the place was packed and I didn't see him. I went back out, found his roommate, and asked him to tell my friend I was going to get a motel. The roommate came back and said my friend was being a dick, but that he'd walk me back to the house so I didn't have to spend money on a hotel. I thanked him. It really meant a lot, especially since my friend was probably inside doing coke or hooking up. I went to bed in my friend's room, but in the middle of the night, he woke me up kissing me and trying to get his freak on. I told him no, that I wasn't interested. His exact words were, "Are you serious? What was the point of you coming here? You're such a waste of time." My feelings were crushed. I went back to sleep, woke up in the morning, and left. I never wrote him again. About a month later, he texted asking to borrow $50. I ignored him and moved on. Story 12. Flashback, 15 years ago. I was talking to someone online I'd known for a few years. We weren't best friends, but we chatted every day and he seemed like a nice guy. At some point he asked where I was from, and I mentioned I lived in Philly and attended the Art Institute. Living in the dorms, without giving any more specifics. Most people already knew I was an art student because I posted about it regularly on LiveJournal. A few days later I came home from class and saw a message on AN. Figured out where you live. I'm outside the dorms at the cafe across the street. Meet me. This guy lived on the West Coast, and after finding out where I lived, he'd made an unannounced trip across the country, tracked down my building, and was camped out at the cafe across the street asking me to meet him, all without any heads up. I immediately felt uncomfortable and didn't know what to do. It's one thing to meet up, another to travel across the country and camp in front of someone's residence. I didn't answer the AIM message right away because I needed time to calm down and think, but more messages came through, each one slightly more hostile than the last. Okay, he'd come this far. It would be rude to ignore him, but at the same time I was seeing red flags everywhere and genuinely creeped out. He kept messaging, getting more agitated and impatient, asking for my class schedule so he could meet me outside class, where I usually ate, what time I had dinner, and other oddly specific details about my life. I was getting full-on stalker vibes, so I lied and said I was visiting my sister and would be back over the weekend, hoping to avoid him. He replied, "That's fine. I can wait." And he did. 3 days later, he was still there, still messaging, still at the cafe, waiting. My privacy felt violated and I started to feel legitimately scared, so I made a decision. Rather than meet him, I logged out of AIM, created a new handle, pretended I'd never existed, abandoned my LiveJournal, and started posting under a new name and persona. I never heard from him again. Story 13. Back during WoW's second expansion, there was this guy in my guild I'd become friends with mostly through other friends. Over time we started talking more and got pretty close. He had this asshole roommate I could sometimes hear in the background, screaming, throwing fits whenever something went wrong in a raid. My friend told me the guy wasn't just loud and obnoxious, but verbally and sometimes physically abusive, too. I had my own apartment, so I told him, "You know what, come stay with me. Just long enough to get you on your feet and into a safe place." He showed up with a trash bag full of clothes and a laptop. I set him up in the apartment and started trying to help him find a job. But he didn't want a job. He never got one either. He just sat in my apartment day after day, eating my food and slowly draining my savings. No matter how much I tried to motivate him, he only dug in deeper and became even more sedentary. Eventually, I told him he had to go. I couldn't afford to support him anymore. Turns out he was just couch surfing. I spoke to some people later and pieced together that his method of finding new temporary places was playing on his friends' sympathies, convincing them he was in some terrible living situation. It worked especially well on me because he had that loud, abusive roommate to point to. He ended up calling a nearby relative, I think his aunt, to come get him. I don't know what story he told her, but I have never seen someone give me a more venomous look in my life. As far as I know, he moved in with his sister and brother-in-law after that. Honestly, I don't care where he wound up. He also stole a bunch of my stuff. First and last time I'll ever do something like that. Story 14. I met two LiveJournal friends. I'll call them Adam and Betty. Adam came from the East Coast. Betty came from the West Coast, and they decided to meet in the middle and vacation in my state so all of US could hang out. Betty was great, exactly the same in real life as she was online, and really pretty too. Adam, though, oh my god. The first night we were supposed to meet up, we planned to go to karaoke. Adam and Betty drove to my house, met my mom, and were going to pick up my twin and me to head to the bar. Betty didn't drink, so she was the one driving the rental car. They knocked. I opened the door, and my elderly terrier mix, Missy, who I adored, immediately warmed up to Betty. Betty walked in, smiling and backing Missy up as she came inside. But then Adam walked in, and it was like a switch flipped. Missy lost her mind. Hackles up, tail tucked, growling, snapping, barking like she was ready to kill. It wasn't her normal bark, it was the full-on danger bark I'd never heard from her before. Mom asked me to help get Missy under control and put her in the back room. Afterward, Mom told me she was worried about Adam and that I should be careful. I said Missy was clearly freaked out too, so I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. At the karaoke bar, Betty ordered soda, which wasn't a big deal since she was a devout Mormon and didn't drink. I ordered soda too, and Adam immediately started pressuring me to drink alcohol because he knew I drank. Hard nope. Being young and naive, I just said, maybe later, instead of calling him out for being a creep. My twin, who was still presenting female at the time, also ordered soda. This surprised me, since he was going through a heavy party phase and usually spent his free time drunk. Adam started pressuring him too. Come on, just have one. Twin said, no, I have a headache. Beer will make it worse. Adam wouldn't let it go. We did karaoke, it was nothing special, and then we went home. The next day, Betty suddenly flew home, changed her ticket, and left early. Later, she explained in a filtered LiveJournal post that Adam wouldn't stop hitting on her, and she didn't feel safe staying in the same hotel. We all blocked him after that. Story 15. I had a guy profess his love for me over Skype. He lived in the UK, and I live in the States. He wanted to come see me. The problem was, I already had a boyfriend. I told him this, told him he was wasting his time, and that I had zero interest in him. He said he was still coming. I told him I had work and school and no time to see him. He said that was fine. He'd wait until I had time. I told him not to come, but he said he had his parents' blessing. So he came. He stayed in a hotel for 3 weeks while I dealt with finals, work, and spending time with my boyfriend. I hung out with him twice, once with a group of friends, and once with my boyfriend there. He got mad because he wanted to hang out with me alone in his hotel room. When I said no, he flipped. He told me that since he'd flown across the ocean, I owed him at least that. A few days later, he flew back home to the UK and blocked me on all social media. Story 16. I, 25, was best friends with a woman, 46. For nearly 6 years, we talked for hours and constantly sent each other gifts. We shared everything from art to personal trauma and were very close. When I fell on hard times, she kindly offered to take me in, and I was so grateful. But after a few months, things started to change, and I began to see why she was so lonely. She was mean, often cruel to anyone who disagreed with her or had a different opinion, and so mentally unstable, she couldn't even buy something without calling her elderly mother for permission. I discovered she was scamming disability services to hide spending from her mom, and she was awful to her caregiver, who, despite being a moron at times, was a sweet guy just trying to help. So I stepped in on his behalf, which she hated because it meant I wasn't on her side. That's when she turned on me. She began to freak out over tiny things, screaming and crying because I missed a spot while mopping, spilled a little water in the kitchen, or ate my food too fast. She was genuinely unhinged. Once I realized how messed up and unstable she was, after being screamed at and chased back to my room, I told her I would move out as soon as possible. And for the next week, she made my life a living hell. She screamed about me on the phone, lied about things I never did, doxed me on social media. She had a big YouTube following, accused me of punching holes in her walls and keying her car, and even called the cops trying to get me arrested for things I hadn't done. Her followers began harassing me with rape and death threats, and she started posting and sharing all the personal secrets I had trusted her with. I had to call my family to come get me because she wanted to keep my dog to force me to stay in contact, and I no longer felt safe. After 6 months of living in hell and 3 years of ongoing online harassment and stalking, I'll never meet someone I met online again. No interest in online friends. It's not safe because you don't know how absolutely messed up someone can be until it's too late. Story 17. I'm an artist, and before my current job, I used to make a living selling my work at comic, anime, and video game conventions across the US and Canada. It was surprisingly lucrative if you did it right, but also a lot more work than people realized. I was very familiar with the convention scene, which leads to this story. I used to take commissions at cons, but I stopped once my art improved to the point where $100 felt way too low. Still, a couple of years ago, right as I was phasing out commissions, a man approached me at a con and asked if I still did them. I told him no, but he pressed me, so I threw out an arbitrary high number, $350 just to get him to drop it. Instead, he pulled out cash and said done. Caught off guard, I asked what he wanted. Long story short, furry porn. I had never drawn furry art in my life, but he kept piling on add-ons, extra characters, and SFW. And in the end, he handed me $700 in cash. Honestly, I wasn't even mad. One night of work in my hotel room for $700? Fine, I drew it. Afterward, he gave my contact info to his friends, and the requests kept coming. Always weirder, but always well paid. Eventually, I made a Fur Affinity account under a fake name, tweaked my style, and embraced it as easy money. I wasn't ashamed, I wasn't proud, it was just business. Things took a turn when I befriended another furry artist online. She seemed like a self-hating furry with a similar sense of humor, and we hit it off. Eventually, I confessed that I didn't care about furries at all and was just in it for the money. She laughed it off and said she understood. She even encouraged me to try tabling at a furry con. I refused, but she mentioned that the following year a furry convention would share a venue and weekend with an anime con I already attended. She invited me to split her table and share her hotel room. That seemed normal enough in the Artist Alley world, so I agreed. When I arrived, she texted me to come sit at her table in the furry con dealer's den. When I found her, she was in full fursuit. This was weird. She'd claimed to hate furries, but okay. What unsettled me more was that she never spoke. She communicated through poses, a squeaky toy, and notes on her phone. She stayed in suit the whole day, and even when we packed up and went back to the hotel, she never removed it. In the room, I flopped onto the bed, exhausted. My shirt had ridden up, and suddenly she stepped between my legs and tickled my exposed stomach. I jumped back, freaked out. She just made that silent, bashful laugh, pose fursuiters do. I tried to laugh it off nervously. She then motioned she was going to shower. As soon as the bathroom door shut, I decided I didn't want to be there when she came out. I planned to grab a key and leave my stuff, then come back later with friends. I opened her wallet to find the hotel key and, out of curiosity, peeked at her ID. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a woman in her 20s. It was a man, mid-40s to 50s, long greasy hair, glasses, stubble. I was so shocked I literally dropped the wallet, grabbed the key, and bolted. I ran down 15 flights of stairs to the lobby and called a friend in full panic. Later that night, my big, intimidating friend went back with me to grab my belongings. The room was empty. I stayed with him for the rest of the weekend, kept strictly to the anime con, and deleted my Fur Affinity account immediately. I blocked every contact and cut myself off from that entire community. The money wasn't worth it. To this day, just remembering it makes me sweat. I've had plenty of funny, weird, even gross convention stories, but this, and one other, topped the list as the absolute worst. That was the closest I've ever come to a real horror story, and I'm just glad I got out before anything worse happened. Story 18. When I was 11, I played on a game website that had chat rooms. You could play games with other people and chat while you played. There weren't many kids there, so I never really talked to anyone, until I saw a kid, we'll call him A, say he was 12. I started talking to him because I'd never seen another kid on the site. We became friends and moved our chats to AOL-IM. My mom was skeptical, so we asked him to take a picture holding a paper with my name on it. He did, and she was satisfied. Our friendship was platonic, but we talked daily for about 3 years. We kept in touch through the game site and MySpace, but lost contact when Facebook took over. Fast forward a few years. I was in college, stuck in a 3-hour class, and for once I had my laptop. During break, I checked my Twitter, which I hadn't used in years, and saw a message from A from a couple weeks earlier. I messaged back, not believing it was him, but it was. We reconnected. At the time, he was in an unhappy relationship, and I was single, away at school, and dealing with my mom's mysterious illness. He was there for me constantly, comforting me through everything. We even planned to meet in New York for New Year's to see the ball drop, but I couldn't afford it and my mom's health was too fragile, so I canceled. Later, I left school to care for my mom. A and I drifted a bit. I started dating someone, and we stopped talking. After that relationship ended, A reached out again. He was single too. From then on, we were talking. Hours on the phone, texting constantly, watching movies together by syncing play buttons. He even called Starbucks at the mall where I worked and paid for my drinks over the phone. He connected with my mom on Facebook to wish her well. To me, he was perfect, and I was falling hard. Months later, my best friend dragged me to dinner to meet her boyfriend's friends, even though she knew I was into A. I reluctantly agreed. Then A walked in with her boyfriend. My heart dropped. He'd secretly contacted her weeks earlier to surprise me for my birthday. He stayed for a week. We went to the aquarium, the beach, Dave and Buster's, even paintballing. It was magical. The night before he left, we kissed. He messaged my dad afterward, saying he wanted to be with me and asked if my dad would help him move to New York. My dad, impressed, agreed to let him live rent-free if he helped with the family poultry farm. A month later, I drove up from Kentucky with his dog and everything he owned. At first, it was perfect. I lost my virginity to him, fell in love, my mom's health improved, and he worked with my dad. But then his mom started calling daily, guilt-tripping him, posting passive-aggressive Facebook statuses, even messaging me about how much she missed him. It was overwhelming. Soon, he grew distant, less sex, then none, ditching my dad to go fishing, glued to his phone, avoiding my friends. About 6 weeks in, he said his mom was falling into depression and he had to move back. I was crushed. We kissed goodbye and even had sex the night before he left. The next day, he was back with his ex E on Facebook. Turns out, according to E, they'd never really broken up. It was just a break. She sent me screenshots of their conversations during the 2 months he lived with me. Him mocking my weight during sex, saying he was bored, counting down the days until he could leave. Everything he'd told me had been a lie. Then the harassment started. He posted unflattering photos of me on Twitter, some I didn't even know he'd taken. He tweeted one to National Geographic captioned, "Look at Nat Geo. A whale is eating my dog." Another read, "We all have that one fat bitch we've slept with. Guilty as charged." For 10 months, this went on daily. Blocking him didn't help. I still saw everything. He even went through my diary and posted entries on Facebook for his friends and family to laugh at. Eventually, I stopped caring. I stopped checking his accounts, met someone else, and moved on. Looking back, I wish I'd paid attention to the whale nugget text from his ex. I could have saved myself a lot of heartbreak. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.